By 1805, the struggle between Napoleonic France and Great Britain had expanded beyond land campaigns into a decisive contest for control of the seas. Napoleon Bonaparte sought naval dominance to protect French trade routes and enable a possible invasion of Britain. To challenge British power, France allied with Spain, combining their fleets into a single force operating from ports along the Atlantic coast. The British Royal Navy, under Admiral Horatio Nelson, maintained constant pressure through blockades, determined to prevent the combined fleet from gaining freedom of movement. These opposing strategies set the stage for a decisive naval confrontation that would determine the balance of power in Europe. In September 1805, the combined French and Spanish fleet, commanded by Admiral Pierre-Charles Villeneuve, lay anchored in the harbour of Cadiz, blockaded by the British Royal Navy. Pressured by Napoleon to act and aware of Nelson's nearby presence, Villeneuve ordered the fleet to sail into the Atlantic on October 19th, aiming to reach the Mediterranean. As the Allied ships slowly exited the harbour, their formation stretched into a long, uneven line due to light winds and differing sailing qualities. British lookout ships quickly signalled the movement, and word was relayed to Admiral Nelson, who prepared his fleet for immediate pursuit. The stage was set for a naval confrontation that would decide control of the seas and shape the course of European warfare. By the morning of 21st October 1805, Admiral Horatio Nelson's fleet sighted the combined Franco-Spanish fleet off Cape Trafalgar, sailing in a long defensive line under Admiral Pierre-Charles Villeneuve. Nelson ordered his ships into two attacking columns, abandoning the traditional parallel line tactic in favour of a direct breakthrough. The British fleet advanced slowly into the wind, exposed to enemy fire as they closed the distance. Aboard HMS Victory, Nelson prepared his officers and men, fully aware that the coming battle would decide control of the seas. Across the water, Villeneuve struggled to maintain formation as shifting winds stretched the Allied line and created gaps between ships. On the morning of October 21st, 1805, the combined Franco-Spanish fleet was sighted off Cape Trafalgar, sailing north along the Spanish coast in loose formation after days of poor coordination. Admiral Villeneuve, realizing the British fleet was near, ordered his ships to form a single line of battle. But light winds and confusion slowed the maneuver. Many Allied ships struggled to take their assigned positions, leaving gaps and uneven spacing in the line. Meanwhile, Admiral Nelson, commanding the British fleet, observed the disordered enemy formation and prepared to exploit its weaknesses. He arranged his ships into two attacking columns, intending to sail directly through the enemy line, rather than engage in the traditional parallel formation. As the distance closed, both fleets prepared for action, crews clearing decks and running out their guns as the calm sea carried the sound of approaching cannon fire. On the morning of October 21st, 1805, the British fleet under Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson closed in on the combined French and Spanish fleet off Cape Trafalgar, forming two advancing columns aimed directly at the enemy line. Admiral Villeneuve held his ships in a traditional single line of battle, intending to rake the British as they approached. As the distance narrowed, the sea grew crowded with warships maneuvering for position, sails straining in shifting winds. British ships endured heavy cannon fire during their slow advance, suffering damage before they could return fire. Despite losses, Nelson maintained course, determined to break the enemy line and force close combat where British gunnery would prevail. The British lead ships reached the Franco-Spanish line and cut through it, shattering the enemy formation into isolated sections. HMS Victory passed through the line near the French flagship Bucentaure, unleashing devastating broadsides at close range. Other British ships followed, engaging enemy vessels on both sides and turning the battle into a series of individual ship-to-ship fights. The Allied fleet's advantage in numbers collapsed as coordinated control broke down amid smoke, splintered masts and tangled rigging. close-range gunnery and disciplined British crews began to overwhelm their opponents across the line. As the close-range fighting intensified, HMS Victory became locked in combat with multiple enemy ships amid heavy smoke and fire. From the quarterdeck, Admiral Horatio Nelson continued directing the battle as sharpshooters fired from the rigging of nearby ships. During this exchange, Nelson was struck by a musket ball fired from the French ship Redoutable. He was carried below deck while the fighting raged above, leaving command of the Victory to his officers. Though gravely wounded, Nelson remained conscious and continued to receive reports on the progress of the battle. As British ships continued their close-range engagements, the Franco-Spanish fleet began to collapse into disorder and defeat. Several Allied vessels struck their colours after suffering severe damage to hulls, rigging and gun crews. Others attempted to flee downwind but were blocked or overtaken by faster British ships. Smoke, wreckage and drifting debris covered the sea as control of the battle slipped decisively from Allied hands. British dominance at sea became unmistakable as one enemy ship after another was disabled or captured. By mid-afternoon, the battle had clearly turned in Britain's favour as the remaining Franco-Spanish resistance collapsed across the field of action. One by one, enemy ships were captured or disabled, leaving the British fleet in control of the waters off Cape Trafalgar. Below decks on HMS Victory, Admiral Horatio Nelson was informed that the battle had been won. Shortly afterward, Nelson succumbed to his wounds, dying with the knowledge that Britain had secured a decisive naval victory. The triumph came at a profound personal cost, even as the outcome reshaped the course of the war.